The next session is an interesting session. We have 5 speakers. It's part presentation, part panel. And it has a very interesting set of actors, if you will. We have 2 entrepreneurs from Africa. We have a lecturer who's also an activist, also from Africa. We have a city councilor from Latin America, and a gender advocate turned technologist, if you will, from India. So let me welcome Esenam Nyador. Esenam, if you don't already know, is Miss Taxi Ghana. So she was the first taxi driver, female taxi driver in Ghana, and now what she's doing is she's getting more and more women to actually get into this industry of driving. She's getting more and more women trained to be there. Thank you for doing that, Esenam. Welcome to the stage, Daniela Arías. Daniela is a councilor in the city of Ecuador, in the city of Quito in Ecuador. And she's been doing some big policy changes, so you could see her almost as a counterpart of Laura in some senses in Ecuador. Thank you. Next, Amanda, the firebrand lecturer from Africa. Amanda is a lecturer at the Makerere University in Uganda, and she's also a bicycle advocate, an activist. Kalpana, Dr. Kalpana Viswanath. Kalpana is the co-founder. Kalpana is the co-founder of Saftipin. Saftipin is an app where you can map various points in the city to find out how those points are, and she would speak a little more about what the app is, but also her story of how she came to see this as a means of, essentially data as a means of advocating for creating safer and better cities for women. And last but not the least, we have Kimberly Toure from Liberia. So Kimberly is partly representing the Association of Liberian Construction Companies. Kimberly actually heads the first and is the only female-led construction company in Liberia and maybe in Africa. And this is great because construction is seen as such a male-dominated space that she's actually showing that it's possible for women to be there, to be doing this work. And it's not that she just heads a company, she actually has women workers who are into the construction industry and making sure that they have the right space, they have their voice. So thank you all. So what we're going to do in this session is this. So we will have each presenter do a short little presentation telling their story of how they came to be and what they're doing. And then we would have one of their other panelists, if you will, ask them a question on whatever they just told us, right? So Esenam, it's yours. You should start. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, okay. My name is Esenam Nyador from Accra, Ghana. And if you can see up there, positive deviancy for development. My quest to become a taxi driver wasn't spontaneous. I earlier on was into several things. I went back to school to read social work major with psychology minor, introduced to gender issues and development, and then I started writing papers, wondering why the transport sector is male-dominated. I zoomed in, was asking a lot of questions. Of course, I couldn't find that much of an answer. So I decided to step on a few toes by being a deviant for empowerment and for development. I started off, but before I tell you how I started off, this is the statistics in Accra. Over 6,000 male taxi drivers and only 4 female taxi drivers. It is such a male-dominated sector. When I started, I wanted to be a dump truck driver. We call it back at home as a tipper truck driver. So you have these dump trucks, carting sand, stones to construction sites. Oh boy. You should hear the excuses, you should hear the excuses. It was just impossible for them to understand me. So then, I needed to tone down my ambitions. After all, it was 6 months down the line trying to get a master driver to take me on as a trainee driver. So I asked myself, Esenam, what can you do? Already you know how to drive. You've been driving since 1999. What else can you do? What's the way forward? Would you continue begging these master drivers to help you learn how to drive a dump truck? Then I said, we've got a taxi. It's a smaller vehicle. I don't need anybody's permission to drive a taxi. Of course, I need to get my taxi license from the metropolis. When I got my taxi on credit, that's another issue. Access to credit. So I got my taxi on credit, and the system works in this way. You work with the taxi, and then you pay up for the vehicle as you work with it. The entry challenges. Boy, you should hear. I attempted to join 3 taxi unions. You should hear them. Just because some tissues decided to gather up themselves on my chest and not below the waistline. They said, no, you're a woman. And I was like, what about being a woman? Oh, they'll go like, but you know, madam, you see, we have male drivers in our unions who don't have vehicles because probably it got broken down or the vehicle owner decided to fire our driver. Why don't you give your vehicle out to our driver or one of our drivers, and then they would work with it and come pay you the rental fee every day? I'm like, no way, I want to drive. They wouldn't budge. But I had to play smart with one of the unions. I went back to them and I said, guys, you know what? You wouldn't accept me formally in your union, you know? But would you mind if I tag around you? I mean, I would come every day, park way behind your union. When you have clients come in and they make offers that you think is too little to accept, can you toss your rejected offers to me? And they were so ignorant. They said, well, you can have all our rejects. They never knew I was armed. I was armed with a call card, something the normal taxi driver in Accra would never do, have business cards or call cards. So very soon they were tossing their rejects to me, and these rejected clients ended up paying the exact amount these men were asking for, but I was getting it. And then I was distributing and announcing my businesses to all these clients. By the time I could say 1, 2, 3, most of the foreign embassies in Accra were calling me for services. I had been put on the Canadian High Commission's list as an alternative transport provider, the American embassy, the German embassy. Ooh. So you see, the persistent deviant, I didn't let it go. I didn't lose in that fight. Now, almost 4 years down the line, I'm 5 years old as a taxi driver. But 4 years down the line, I realized what I had wasn't just deviancy, it was a virus. A virus that was catching on like wildfire. Very soon, I was approached by Scania West Africa and GIZ Ghana. Said, hey, Esenam, come. We have this idea, and I think you are the best person to help us out. We want to train female drivers to drive commuter buses, the BRT buses in Accra, and such an inspiration you are. Can you be the brand ambassador? I said, with all pleasures. I jumped on that project. From nowhere, I started running the campaign. Over 400 female applicants applied, whereby the project stakeholders weren't sure even if we would have 5. But then we had to streamline all the 400, and then we got to 72. Even though this one says 60, we ended up with 72. And these are women who have never sat on the driver's seat, never seen a pedal, never touched a steering wheel. Today, these women are maneuvering and managing these long buses, 3-ton buses on our streets. That is the virus we're talking about. As though I was, thank you. As though that wasn't enough, something happened again. That is it. Unapologetically, this time around, spreading a positive virus for development. The second project running concurrently is Women Moving Trucks. And we're training women to drive trailer buses, articulated trucks or trailer trucks. See the irony. I wanted to drive a dump truck. The men said no. I bypassed that hurdle, can drive a 3-ton bus. Now, I'm driving a trailer truck, and I'm helping other women based by the funding of GIZ Ghana and Scania West Africa. We're training women to drive articulated trucks. In fact, they are fuel tank trucks. And this is what our ladies would be driving in the next 3 months. That is what we say is empowerment. My name is Esenam. I'm an occupational gender desegregation activist. I don't know what you will call me, but I'm just a humanist who is fighting for equal opportunities as to how these power sources of control are shared when it comes to economic participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Esenam, for your story. It was quite empowering, I would say. Thank you. So now's the time for Kimberly, for you to ask Esenam something about what she's doing and how does it connect to what you do. Do you have a question for her?
Oh, okay. So how are you motivating women to join your team?
And Esenam, I'll request you to be slightly quick because we don't have too much time.
The motivation is keep fighting. With all the hurdles I had experienced, they see me crossing and jumping over these hurdles. That alone is motivational. It is a male-dominated sector, and pampering wouldn't get the job done. I'm forging ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, Daniela, over to you. Yeah. Can we have Daniela's presentation, please?
It's okay.
Okay.
Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Daniela Chacón. I'm a city councilor in Quito. Thank you so much to the German Corporation for bringing me here. I'm really excited to be here and to be sharing this moment with all of these inspiring women that have been talking throughout the whole day. Politics is in my veins. I'm a politician. And growing up, I never saw women in politics, in my country at least. This is my beautiful city, please come. I grew up in a world where, you know, women were not leaders, women were not politicians, and somehow I got politics in my veins, so I decided that that's what I wanted to do. And I worked for it for several years, and in my country we have the parity law, which makes political parties, when you have a list for candidates, to if you have a man first, then you have a woman, or vice versa. And so I was working at the current mayor's in Quito campaign, and I was just, you know, speechwriter. And because I wanted to go into politics, and I thought that that was an entry. I didn't want to become part of any of the traditional political parties in my country, because, you know, they will never ever let a young woman in their ranks. So I saw an opportunity in a new party, and I went for it, and I started as a speechwriter. And one time they were talking, and they were like, you know what, we need women for candidates, because they couldn't be able to fill the lists. Because, you know, in political parties, mostly they're all men, and at the decision-making level, still only men. So they didn't really have any women in mind, and I was like, hello, here I am. I'll run for office. And then, you know, the then candidate, now mayor, asked me if I wanted to join the list, and I said, of course, and we won. And then they wanted a woman and I was elected city council for 2014 to 2019. I'm still city councilor until 2019. And then they needed a woman to become vice mayor. Because, you know, the mayor was a man and it was politically correct. And I was like there, hi, I'm here. And so I became vice mayor, and I was vice mayor until 2016. And then the mayor asked me to negotiate with the Public Transportation Guild the new tariff system. And, okay, I have 2 minutes. And that's how I became part of the transportation system. I said, again, I raised my hand and I said, yes, I'll do it. And one of the things that I really am compelled about is that the decision makers, the planners, transport planners, never use a bus, never walk, never use a bicycle, and they don't wear skirts. So being a woman, using bus, being sexually harassed in my city many times in the buses and in the streets, I became an advocate for that. I created a sexual harassment program in my city that is called Cuéntame. Well, it was called Cuéntame, now has another name. And it's a program for women to be able to raise their voices when there has been when they have suffered a sexual harassment case. And we implemented this program in 2014. It's been 2019. It's 2018 now, and we have over 1,100 claims. We have 40 people that have been sentenced to prison for the very first time in my country. Sexual harassment. Thank you. And with this, I'll finish. For the very first time in my country, sexual harassment in public transportation is being talked about. I'm not gonna be here and stand up and here and say we have solved the problem, because we haven't, but it's part of the public conversation. It's not normal anymore, which is really important, and it's part of the policy-making process. And the only way that we could have achieved this was because there was one woman in that table at one point saying, hey, I am being sexually harassed in the public transportation system. If we wanna make good policies, if we wanna make decisions for everybody, we need to take into account women's perspective. And that's how the program got money, political will, got funded, and now, you know, it's growing, it's becoming much more important. And I think the most important thing for me is when a young woman comes to me and says, you know, from now, ever since the program started, I feel more safe when I use the public transportation system. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And isn't that so gratifying, right? Kalpana, You've been working a lot with politicians, administrators in India and elsewhere, even in Bogota and other places. Do you have a question for Daniela on whatever she just told us about?
I think it's very, for a woman in any city to have someone in politics, in the government, who talks about sexual harassment is, I think, very empowering, because most of the time, even the women who get into power sometimes have to defeminize and not talk about their experiences as women. So I think I just want to ask you, have you ever felt the need that you couldn't, that you had to sort of fit in with the men in this process of becoming an empowered councillor?
Well, it has been really difficult because, I'm usually the one that is always talking about the women issues. And, here she goes again. Happens to me a lot. But I've never been shy away from it. I've had to find the strategies to make it, to get to the point where they will listen to me. And sometimes I use, statistics. Some other times I use my personal experience. Not necessarily all the time the personal experience works, because it's not something that they can relate to. So they will just have to take my word for it, which works sometimes. But some other times, I use the statistics. I use benchmarking. I find for every single thing that I want to raise as a woman in an all male table, or where there's only few women, I find the person that's going to be my champion, and I understand what that person wants, the information that he or she wants, and that's what I use, and it has worked so far.
Thank you. Thank you. So over to you, Amanda.
Thank you very much. Teachers always carry small notes, so I have some notes here with me. My name is Amanda, you've been told, and I'm from Uganda. I have little time.
Yes.
I'm happy to be here. I see familiar faces in the audience. It's not what I always talk about. It's something new. I asked some men earlier on how they feel to be here with us discussing women, mobilize women. And one of them honestly told me that he was feeling guilty. He said, no, but you're not the one doing all the planning work for the world. You're not responsible at all. No, but I think that we men can do something, he said. So I would like to salute all the men that made it to this conference to discuss women, mobilize women. We want to be mobile. We want to move. Nobody hates to be mobile. And to move should be a choice, and how to move should also be a choice. These stories we know, we have heard, we have statistics, we have reports, we have experienced, so you cannot expect lessons today about it. And we shout about freedom, we shout about democracy, we are a democratic state, democratic government. But when you look in the road system, you see what you actually have as a state, as a system. So somehow, we rule the world basing on lies, because we can't see the truth. You see, that man in the middle of the road, that is somewhere in Uganda, northern part of Uganda. When people see that man, it looks normal. Someone said earlier that when men plan for transport is planned for men. But when I see this, I have another story to add on that statement. You see the man standing in the middle of the road. I think that could be his friend, maybe girlfriend, you never know. But this looks nice there. Nobody shouts about it. But if it was a woman, another story is introduced. So what is this special thing about women and mobility? Safety is in the middle of it, of that story. And we cannot run away from it. Or is it something else? Is it gender? What is it about? That's Amanda from Uganda in Kampala. That's one of our nastiest roundabouts that we have to fight to move across. And look at me there. To be honest, I'm not scared to be there. But so many people are scared to see me there. Including that man. See the gap he gives me? I put this up on my Facebook page, and there was a discussion. It's because you are a woman that they didn't knock you down, someone said. So do you believe that? So, what is that story with the woman? Look at me there. No, that dress, you shouldn't ride your bicycle with that dress. The problem there is not the dress. It's not even the motorcycle. It's not even the car. But the bag. Someone said, get another bag. So everything seems to be wrong somewhere, but nobody knows what is it. But the woman has introduced everything wrong in the system. This is, this gentleman. So when I put this up, it introduces another topic. Huh? On a bicycle. Oh, you got him. He also rides. So the discussion changes a little bit because this is a royal. I am not. I'm far from being royal. But I'm a woman. That brings us again together on the same page. And then when you see that, more than a woman comes into the story. You have the man, you have the baby, you have a family, you have society. And how does it look? It looks like this society will have no future. They will soon die because they will be knocked down. This family is finished. Those are the images that now keep growing and growing. And then I come back to the statement of when men plan for transport. Transport is planned for men. And whoever plans for our men really hates our men. What is this? This man is someone's husband, someone's brother. Look at, he's struggling because of an accident at a roundabout. That is not a plan at all, not for man, not for woman. This old woman is doing fine. I was told she was about 70, but look at her body, the owner of that bicycle. So it brings a story. This woman has been riding all her life. Why? Why did she choose to ride? And has it always been safe? So personally, as Amanda who rides from the city center, I'm challenged by this woman because in this town, women ride. It's normal. But when I ride, it's not normal, and everybody is telling me one thing: don't wear a skirt. The second thing, you don't have a helmet. You shouldn't carry that bag. But nobody tells this woman anything. It seems to be normal. And that's abnormal. I think the thinking is not right. So the woman in the story of safety and livable cities, we must discover what is in the woman in transport. The woman in transport means people in transport, society in transport. It's beyond woman. And that's why this conference is very important to me. It's not about feminism. This is about realism. I'm realistic. We all have to think straight beyond the woman, with the woman in mind. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
So, a question from the women in a taxi to a woman on the bicycle.
Thank you, Amanda, for such great presentation. I would want to ask, your presentation makes me feel so guilty as a Ghanaian.
So,
we have no bicycling lane. I mean, if we do, just for some stretch of kilometers. How is this coming up in Uganda?
we have bicycle lanes on paper. They are soon coming on ground. And those bicycle lanes on paper are there because of a woman in me. I learned how to ride when I was old. So I was interested in trying this out in my country when I saw people riding bicycles. So I generated this project. And it has been approved. Everything is perfect. We just have to see it on the road. And in my campaigns, I'm not telling people to get into the nasty situation, but I'm saying planners address this nasty situation. It's not the women, it's not the men, it's the situation.
Over to you, Kalpana.
Good afternoon. As Shreya introduced me, I run a technology company which works on data. I'm an extremely unlikely technology and data person. I began my life as a sociologist, and as a young woman asked this morning, I've always been a feminist, and my work was as a gender activist, working with cities to address violence against women. In 2013, my co-founder, who is actually the technology person, and I were discussing this whole sort of rise in sexual violence and the sexual harassment in public spaces, and how do we ensure that, we can find a way to get people's voices to each other as well as to the government. And that was the time, a lot of people were building apps. So, but of course, people who build apps are really, 19-year-olds and 25-year-olds who build an app in 5 days, and they're out in the market there. So, in addition to not being a technologist, I was also age challenged in starting a technology company. So it has been quite a learning curve to be from working in an NGO, working on safe cities, to actually starting a company and saying, okay, now we are going to use data, because what we'd been doing before, I've been working on urban planning and gender for many years now, more than 15 years. But in this avatar of mine, what I'm trying to say is that how do we use data? How do we use data as a tool to ensure that governments respond to people's concerns in cities? We all know that sexual violence and sexual harassment in public spaces is a very serious problem. And I think that's been talked about since the morning, about how do we access streets. But I also realize very strongly that unless we're able to access the street, we will never be equal. The street is actually the most equal place in a city. And unless we're able to realize the potential of the street. So I come from a country, India, which I'm sure all of you know, that sexual violence and sexual harassment in public spaces is a very big problem. So, I started this organization called Saftipin. This is a public space in one of our cities, and it's a crowded public space, but I do like this picture because it reflects an active public space, and I do believe this is how public spaces should be. And traditionally, many of our cities did have this kind of public spaces. But the introduction of the car and the introduction of planning for the car has changed the way that the public space is. And so we have a different imagination of what the public space should be. But sexual harassment is not just an Indian problem. And I think that's something we all have to accept. It's a global problem. It's been talked about since the morning. There are enough statistics to show that around the world, 50% in a city, 60% in some city, 80% in some city, 90% in some city % say they have faced sexual harassment either in the last year or in their lifetime. I think, the Me Too movement brought into sort of relief the fact that this is really a serious problem. I think the time has come for us to say that, the right to walk on the street is a fundamental right. Somehow we have willingly given up that right. We haven't fought enough for that right, and I think that's something we have to fight for. So the organization that I started is called Saftipin, and we called it Saftipin for 3 reasons. One is that a Saftipin, if you look at the app, when there's any report, there's a pin where it is. The second thing is a Saftipin actually, if is used to sort of keep something together. So we believe that as a tool, it would be used for communities to work together. But finally, in India, and I don't know of other countries, many women of my generation carried safety pins when we went in buses, so that if someone came very close to us, we could just poke them. So a safety pin is something that women actually, at least in India, we're very familiar with. So, so what do? The safety pin, we do have a process called the safety audit. Okay, and we measure these 9 parameters, which is both infrastructure, but also the way a public space is used. It is not only infrastructure. We did something very early, which was really to partner with a media house and come up with ways of encouraging more people to use it. So this app is now nearly 5 years old, and we have about over 100,000 downloads of the app in countries around the world. We've got data in about 30 cities globally, in India, but in many other cities also. Just to give you an idea, in addition to the individual user who can use the app to see where the city is safe, use it to tell her how to get to the place safest, as well as to give her own information, we also provide the data to city governments. So for example, in Delhi, this map shows you, we show this to the city government to show that there were about 7,000 points in the city where there was complete darkness. There was no light. And the city government has used this data to actually improve the lighting in the city. We also did some work around last mile connectivity, because we did, as I said, the ability to move safely is not just landing up in a metro safely, but after you get off the metro or the bus stop, how do you get to your house safely? How do you get to your workplace? So we've done some work around that, and I think that is the last mile and the first mile connectivity is something we need to work on as much as the more sort of the train and the buses. And we did some work in Bogota, very interestingly, on auditing and mapping the bike paths in the city to see, and this data that was collected was used by the city government to both decide where to improve lighting as well as where to put the bicycle stands in the city. You know, so I think really, before I end, I think what I think is that today most people are beginning to talk about smart cities. But what is a smart city? A smart city is not technology alone. Technology can only enhance or aid a solution. We have to understand that technology is not the solution. And I think that maybe if we have more sociologists who begin to do technology, we might understand this, because very often, you know, the solution to safety problems in a city is seen in a CCTV camera. Now, a CCTV camera is not a solution. A CCTV camera is a tool that can aid in some situations. So I think really what I'd like to sort of end by saying is that we have to find ways of harnessing technology, harnessing data, because today, in a world of data and technology, we must use it. As women, we must use it. But we must use it strategically, and we must understand its limitations as well, because at the end of the day, it's people's voices. It's what women say, what kind of a city that they want, which is going to bring about the change. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalpana. Over to you, Daniela. What would you do as a city councillor to... I have a question as a city councillor to someone like Kalpana.
I know that governments generally are afraid of data and transparency and publication of data because it shows that they're not doing well enough. So I wonder what has been the main challenge for Saftipin to be, adopted by governments, and what have you done to face that challenge?
Absolutely, that's the biggest challenge. One is that if you give them data, because it's like, it's like Winston Churchill said, there are 3 kinds of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics. So when you give them statistics and numbers, they're like, where did you get this from? Maybe people are lying, so it's always possible that people lie, that they this thing. So I think the challenge has been to be, as someone spoke this morning, is to be really persistent, and I've had many lack of successes. There are many city governments where we haven't been able to get them to use the data, to be honest. But we have had, because I do believe, like you and like many of the people sitting in this room, there are actually people today in government who want to see a change. And you have to find those right people. And when you find them, you have to stick to them till they are shunted out somewhere else. So really, it's a struggle, and it's frustrating because you work all the time to build up a relationship with one person or one group, and then they are transferred. At least in India, their bureaucrats are transferred all the time with no reason. So I think I would just say persistence and luck. I think sometimes, if you're at the right place at the right time for someone to listen to, something happens and the world can change.
Maybe I should also say that persistence brings luck, because if you're not, unless you're there all the time, you would not be there at that instance when you actually have an opening. So, last, Kimberly. So please tell us about how you're transforming the roads of Liberia with women power.
Thank you. First, I would like to start by thanking the organizers for giving me the opportunity to tell my story. I am a construction contractor, entrepreneur, you may say, in construction. My passion for construction comes from the heart. I grew up in a slum community where I remember constantly being teased along with my neighbors about our community. And I was shocked the first time it happened because my family and I lived in a very beautiful, nice concrete house. And I was really surprised because it was very new to me. But I couldn't imagine how my neighbors felt, those who lived in shacks. So I remember growing up thinking that when I get big, I would go into construction, build houses for families, so that kids don't experience.
This clicker, if you would like to use, if you want to use other slides, you have a clicker with you.
Oh yeah,
Right there.
thank you. Okay.
You want to go to the next slide?
Right. Oh, okay. Thank you. So I grew up, well, that is not exactly my neighborhood, but yeah. So I grew up thinking that I will build houses for children so they don't experience what I experienced. And over the years, I got into construction, and I started to build low-income houses. And, in Africa, the credit line is kind of bad, so I got more into the contractor sector where we build houses for private families, private entities who build for organizations and for government. So as you can see, I built a gas station for a company, and here I am in my construction gear. In Liberia, 50% of the population has no access to roads. Like you said earlier, the needs of a rich country is different from the needs of a poor country. So where I'm from, we have serious difficulties with roads. And without roads, there's really no systematic transportation. So this is why I have to bring in roads more in my dialogue. Without roads, farmers cannot take produce to the marketplaces. And of course, that causes a neighborhood without roads. You find fewer hospitals, schools, and a pregnant woman will have to walk like 20 to 30 minutes in labor before she gets to the hospital because there's no transportation. And that causes the youth to move away from that city. So the exodus of youth moving to cities trying to find opportunities. And this is why you see some African young men desperately risking their lives on boats to Europe because there's no opportunity. And of course, roles creates economic growth. As a female, my experience with construction, working in the counties and in the rural areas, I saw the condition of roads, and I decided to get more into roads than building houses. But I realized quickly that the construction industry, especially when it comes to roads, is very brutal because men don't take women seriously. They believe that women should be secretaries, accountants, but never a company owner, especially not a construction company, because they believe that women are not emotionally prepared for the pressure of construction. So that's another situation we women face in Liberia. And for that reason, the stigma is that it's there. And most women are discouraged because they think that it is difficult to get jobs, to get contracts and projects. So some of them leave the industry for another comfortable job or opportunities in other construction or other areas. Now, I decided to organize a group of women in construction to have a voice so that we can be seen and heard, because women suffer the most. Women suffer the most because we are the ones who have to take our children to school. And sometimes we have to walk them 30 minutes to school because we don't have the means of good roads and transportation. So in doing that, I have met with, sorry. Okay. So I have met with my fellow women where we discussed the way forward. And we lobby. I've met, this is our new president, President George Weah, and our former president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. We have been advocating, and that's the female group, part of the female group. We have about 35 females in the group, and I am the chairperson of that group. And we have been advocating, thanks to GIZ for the opportunity they have built. They have been working with us, training us, and creating capacity building, which is something that we really need in Liberia. We lack the skills, skilled workers. We lack of qualified managers, and we also lack of credit lines and equipment. So those are the challenges that we face as women in construction. So thank you very much. I know you're telling me time is up, so I have to go. But my last thing I would say, we as women, we should never give up. And this is why in what we do as African women in construction, we will not back down. We will fight until we get our voices heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly, and I can completely understand where you're coming from. Many would probably not know, but then I actually studied mechanical engineering, and my first job was to design cycle rickshaws. And when I actually turned up at a workshop and I said, listen, we are going to design the rickshaw this way, and the guys were like, but what do you know about making rickshaws or making anything? And so I just sat down with them, cut pipes, steel pipes, bent them, and welded them. And they were like, oh my God, you actually made it. And the good news is actually this project, which started 20 years back in India, presently has led to about 500,000 rickshaws, cycle rickshaws in multiple cities in North India, which are providing transportation to about 4 to 5 million people. So it's possible if you're persistent, if you're there, and if you show it, people start seeing, noticing. So be persistent, just do it. A question for Kimberly from Amanda. Amanda, you're also, other than being a bicycle activist, a teacher. So how can we skill, and you could probably ask that.
We have a situation of mobility having an impact from construction, from shopping malls, from buildings or roads constructed, determine how people use them or which mode is. You understand that? So what's the current situation in your country? Do you have the same clash? For example, when there is traffic congestion, we blame the builders. When we have many people buying cars, we blame also the road constructors. For example, we have a policy for non-motorized transport, but the constructors do not pay attention to that policy. They just construct roads. So I don't know what you think about that complaint or clash.
Well, before I answer your last question, in Liberia, we have only one shopping mall. And it's like in the whole country, literally one shopping mall. And it's very, very small. I think the stores in there is less than 10 stores. So that's how backward we are, unfortunately. But when it comes to roads and the structure of roads, construction is very challenging. Most of the roads are not built for, a huge population. So in the city, we experience a whole lot of traffic. So this is why our government is now putting out projects for roads so that we can have better space to get around, to move around freely. If I answer your question, if I heard your question right. So, thank you.
Thank you. So I hope you enjoyed that session. Thank you all for sharing your stories. We would have a small little